So now we are here live in studio with our second guest today, Alison Bodine, who is going to talk to us about the most recent U.S. threats of invading Venezuela. Alison is the coordinator of the Fire This Time movement for social justice, Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, as well as member of the Venezuela Strategy Group. She was recently in Venezuela as an international observer to the presidential elections. She has also published a book called Revolution and Counterrevolution in Venezuela, A Battle of Ideas. Press on 20 years of American attempts at overthrowing the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela.
Y ahora estamos aquí en el estudio con Alison Bodine, que hablará sobre las más recientes amenazas estadounidenses de invadir Venezuela. Alison es la coordinadora del Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, así como miembro del Venezuela Strategy Group. Recientemente estuvo en Venezuela como observadora internacional en las elecciones presidenciales. También ha publicado un libro titulado Revolution and Counterrevolution in Venezuela, o La Revolución y la Contrarrevolución en Venezuela, y el libro es sobre los 20 años de intentos estadounidenses de derrocar la revolución bolivariana en Venezuela.
So thanks for joining us today, Alison.
Thank you.
So recently, the U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened to invade Venezuela, whilst his Vice President Mike Pence visited several Latin American countries to discuss the current political situation in those countries and to garner diplomatic support from right-wing Latin American leaders for an eventual American action. So Trump's idea of invading Venezuela is not new. In August last year, he had already suggested the United States should invade Venezuela. That idea has strong support among the American intelligentsia. In November, Foreign Affairs magazine, which is published by the extremely influential Council of Foreign Relations, published an article on what a U.S. intervention in Venezuela looked like. And in this past June, the journal Foreign Policy published an article called It's Time for a Coup in Venezuela. So it's crystal clear that the U.S. has no peaceful intentions for Venezuela or Latin America as a whole. And unfortunately, it seems like Canada has no goodwill towards Venezuela either.
Recientemente, el presidente estadounidense Donald Trump amenazó con invadir Venezuela, mientras que su vicepresidente Mike Pence visitó varios países latinoamericanos para discutir la situación política actual en ese país y obtener el apoyo diplomático de los líderes latinoamericanos de derecha para una eventual acción estadounidense. La idea de Trump de invadir Venezuela no es nueva. En agosto del año pasado, ya había sugerido que Estados Unidos debía invadir Venezuela. Esa idea tiene un fuerte apoyo entre la intelectualidad estadounidense. En noviembre, la revista Foreign Affairs, publicada por el extremadamente influyente Consejo de Relaciones Exteriores, publicó un artículo sobre qué aspecto tiene una intervención estadounidense en Venezuela. Y en junio de este año, la revista Foreign Policy publicó un artículo titulado Es hora de un golpe en Venezuela. Está claro que Estados Unidos no tiene intenciones pacíficas para Venezuela y América Latina en su conjunto. Desafortunadamente, nuestro país tampoco tiene buena voluntad hacia Venezuela.
So all that being said, Alison, it seems like this is the first time an American president openly calls for an invasion, a return to gunboat diplomacy. Why do you think Trump is so brazenly threatening Venezuela?
Thank you again to America Latina Al Dia and to both of you, Daniel and Katie, for having me here today.
Oh, pleasure.
Within the Fire This Time Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, we think it's really important to make sure that we understand that this attack isn't coming only from Trump. As you said, this may be the most brazen suggestion that the United States invade Venezuela, but we have to remember that under U.S. President Obama, that's when Venezuela was declared an extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. What this meant is that there was a executive order issued that somehow was claiming that Venezuela, which is thousands of miles away and has never militarily threatened the United States, was a danger to the United States. That enables U.S. Congress and the U.S. executive branch to level all sorts of attacks against this independent and sovereign country. And when Donald Trump suggested invasion, as you have correctly outlined, it was backed up not only by foreign policy, but also by articles in the Washington Post and the New York Times, all whom echo the U.S. administration, that the U.S. government has some sort of authority to invade other countries, to overthrow democratically elected governments like that in Venezuela. And really, this has been happening for the last 20 years since President Chavez was elected in Venezuela, and that country took a different path than what U.S. governments, the Canadian government, and what foreign corporations have been forcing Latin America to do for so many years.
Esta es la primera vez que un presidente estadounidense pide abiertamente una invasión. Es un regreso a la diplomacia de las cañoneras. ¿Por qué Trump amenaza tan descaradamente a Venezuela?
Pensamos en la campaña en solidaridad con Venezuela de Fire This Time, que este dicho no está nuevo. Es una parte de una campaña de 20 años contra el gobierno de Venezuela independiente y se tiene sobre su soberanía. Y es importante saber que fue el presidente Obama que tenía una orden ejecutiva contra Venezuela. Se declaró que Venezuela es una amenaza extraordinaria contra los Estados Unidos y su seguridad nacional. Y pensemos que esta administración de los Estados Unidos, incluyendo Trump, está continuando y siguiendo las políticas de los Estados Unidos contra Venezuela y su gobierno independiente. Es una campaña del imperialismo y los Estados Unidos es el líder, pero hay Canadá y la Unión Europea y muchos países otros que son parte de esta campaña a invocar su autoridad in Venezuela y en todo de Latinoamérica.
So, Alison, as you say, it was during the Obama administration that Venezuela was considered an enemy of the state or whatever. So this is not necessarily only Trump, and it's not new. As you say, they've had interest since Chavez was president many, many years ago. So what do you think the interests are behind Trump and the U.S., those threats of invasion? Is it oil? Is it ideology? Ego?
It's all of the above. I think what the media would like us to think is that it's somehow Trump's egotistical, maniacal attitude. But really, he's a representative of the United States government and administration. And Venezuela does have the world's largest oil reserves. Venezuela has very large amount of trade with the United States in oil, which unveils a lot of contradictions in U.S. policy against Venezuela and makes it more difficult to attack Venezuela. But also, I think Venezuela is the threat of a good example. And I've written about this a lot in the Fire This Time newspaper and observed it when I was in Venezuela as part of 2 separate delegations this year. Really, people understand the responsibility that they've held as far as leading an independent path in Latin America. And that's the good example I'm talking about. It's sovereignty, it's self-determination, it's taking the resources of the country back under the control of the people in that country. And so the U.S. doesn't want that example to spread. It really has inspired not only governments throughout Latin America, but also social movements that you can do this. You can throw off the yoke of the United States, which has for so many years used the Monroe Doctrine that says they can invade any country in Latin America, that Latin America is their backyard. And Venezuela, Chavez before and Maduro today, and really the people of Venezuela are taking a strong stand against this, and they understand exactly what they're doing and how threatening that is to U.S. hegemony in Latin America.
Alison, dijiste que hay 20 años que Estados Unidos intentan derrocar la revolución bolivariana. Pero de esta vez, ¿cuáles son los intereses detrás de la amenaza de Donald Trump? ¿Es el petróleo o su ideología o su ego sin fin?
Total. Todas de las cosas son importantes por los Estados Unidos. Pienso los medios normales, los medios grandes del mundo, queremos nosotros creer es solo la personalidad de Trump. Pero no es así. Es el petróleo también, porque Venezuela tiene los grandes recursos de petróleo del mundo y hay muchas inversiones entre Venezuela y los Estados Unidos y eso se complicarán las relaciones entre los Estados Unidos y Venezuela. Pero Primeramente, pienso que es el ejemplo de Venezuela por el mundo y por Latinoamérica en particular. Los Estados Unidos quieren hegemonía en Latinoamérica, a controlar todos los recursos naturales y todas las personas allá en Latinoamérica. Y es una doctrina Monroe por muchos años que los Estados Unidos se usan a involucrar en todo de los políticas en Latinoamérica, y pienso que este es importante por los Estados Unidos a no tener los países son independientes y si tiene soberanía en Latinoamérica. Por esto es un ejemplo por otros gobiernos en Latinoamérica, pero también por los movimientos sociales en Latinoamérica.
That's a very good point. Do you think the U.S. or Trump has any support within Latin America or and among the Latin diaspora for an invasion of Venezuela?
Definitely not on the whole. I think there's a few important examples for this. Recently, when Mike Pence was in Latin America, he didn't receive a whole lot of support, even from U.S. allies, when he brought up the idea of other countries in Latin America sanctioning Venezuela. Really, that was the goal of his trip. And he went amidst a time when the U.S. was putting children in cages that come from Central America and attacking immigrants, migrants, and refugees. And he somehow thought that he had the authority to declare Venezuela violated human rights and needed to be sanctioned, which is an act of war. So he didn't receive a whole lot of support, even from U.S. allies. There's also important organizations that Cuba and Venezuela have worked together to build, CELAC or ALBA. These are economic organizations of solidarity that are creating another balance of forces in Latin America outside of what the U.S. government has tried to establish with their so-called free trade agreements and so on. And so I think Venezuela, alongside the leadership of Cuba, has really been forming a force to say that the U.S. government is no longer welcome in Latin America. Of course, there are right-wing governments that have support by the United States. But when it comes to invasion of Venezuela, even those governments have said, no, invasion is not welcome. But there is, of course, an important threat, which I think we should discuss, which is that Colombia, a country which shares a very long border with Venezuela, has recently joined NATO, a military alliance that was created during the Cold War. What business does Colombia have in joining NATO? I think that's a blatant military threat against Venezuela as well, and where they're hoping to get some more support.
Alison, ¿piensas que Trump tiene apoyo en América Latina y entre la diáspora latina para una invasión a Venezuela?
No. Pienso que los Estados Unidos y el gobierno de los Estados Unidos no tiene mucho apoyo de los gobiernos en Latinoamérica. Cuando Mike Pence, el vicepresidente de los Estados Unidos, fue a Latinoamérica, él no tiene mucho apoyo por su plan al convencer los otros países a tener sanciones contra Venezuela, y también cuando Trump se anunció su intención a involucrar Venezuela militarmente, no tiene apoyo de los otros gobiernos en Latinoamérica, incluyendo los de la derecha que están aliados con los Estados Unidos. Y este es porque los Estados Unidos no tienen una historia muy bien en Latinoamérica. Tienen una historia de involucrado a matar mucha gente, a robar todos los recursos, y pienso que las personas en Latinoamérica están contra los Estados Unidos y este tipo de política en estas horas, incluyendo por Venezuela. Y también hay organizaciones que están creando por Cuba y Venezuela. Juntos se tienen organizaciones como CELAC o ALBA que pueden tener una otra fuerza de alianzas contra las ideas de los Estados Unidos, contra organizaciones como el OEA o también el FTA, los Free Trade Agreements en Latinoamérica. Y esta es una parte muy importante a entender sobre Venezuela.
Mencionaste, dijiste que Colombia está para ayuntarse a OTAN.
Sí, cierto. Ahora Colombia está una parte de OTAN, una alianza militar que fue creado por los Estados Unidos y sus aliados durante la Guerra Fría. Y es muy extraña, pero también muy peligroso contra Venezuela a tener una alianza militar en Sudamérica. Y no hay una razón que está en los intereses de las gentes en Venezuela o en Latinoamérica. Es solo para facilitar la involucrando de los Estados Unidos allá.
Mm-hmm. So, Alison, moving from the U.S. now to Canada, our country, what can you tell us about Canada's relationship with Venezuela? Could you explain the foreign policy of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau towards Venezuela? Is it any different from Harper, or is it more or less the same? Why don't you tell us about that?
So when the Fire This Time Venezuela Solidarity Campaign began our pickets, which we have monthly against U.S. Sanctions and threats against Venezuela, we found it very important to also include Canada. Canada is taking a very upfront role in also working to overthrow the government of Venezuela in these days. The Foreign Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, spends a lot of time on Twitter, especially denouncing Venezuela for so-called human rights abuses, really has focused a lot of her energy at international meetings in trying to convince people around the world that Venezuela is the enemy somehow, even though Venezuela is so many thousands of miles away from Canada. I think there's two really important parts to this. One is that Canadian interests, so-called Canadian interests, are threatened in Venezuela. Mining companies, of which 50% of Canadian mining companies are based here in Vancouver, for example, they have lost a lot of the interest that they had in Venezuela as those resources have been turned over to the people instead of to these foreign corporations. That's been a big threat, as well as Canada. Because of what I was saying about the history of the U.S. in Latin America, the United States cannot so easily go to Latin America and claim that they have the authority to impose so-called human rights or democracy. But Canada, in some ways, can still. They can say, but we uphold the values of the democracy and human rights, and they can kind of have a better face internationally. And that's why I think, for example, Canada and the government has been integral in leading something called the Lima Group, which is a coalition of right-wing governments in Latin America with Canada that has really led a lot of the rhetoric against Venezuela. And the Lima Group was created because these right-wing forces weren't able to gain the support they needed in the OAS, in the Organization of American States. So they said, okay, we'll just form our own organization where we can pass resolutions and convince other countries that it's actually the world that's against Venezuela, when that's not the truth at all. And so our monthly protests with the Fire This Time Venezuela campaign also focus on Canadian intervention in Venezuela, which, besides on a diplomatic level, has also taken on the form of sanctions. And so Canada, for example, today, there's no Canadian ambassador in Venezuela. There's no Venezuelan ambassador in Canada. So diplomatic relations have been very reduced after Venezuela uncovered the fact that the ambassador from Canada in Venezuela was essentially helping to fund and support so-called opposition groups in Venezuela. And then also the sanctions by the government of Canada are directed right now against 52 Venezuelan officials. But we have to keep in mind that these sanctions, even if the government says they are targeted, are part of a larger sanctions campaign that really is harming the people of Venezuela themselves. And so Canada's taken on this attack at all sorts of levels.
Alison, hablando de las relaciones de nuestro país con Venezuela, ¿podría explicar la política exterior del primer ministro Trudeau hacia Venezuela? ¿Es diferente de la política de Harper o es más de lo mismo?
Pienso que es más de lo mismo, desafortunadamente. En la campaña en solidaridad con Venezuela de Fire This Time, tuvimos tenemos cada mes una protesta contra las sanciones y amenazas contra Venezuela y ahora se incluyendo las de Canadá. El gobierno de Canadá se tiene sanciones contra Venezuela, contra 52 oficiantes y representantes en Venezuela. Y es una parte de la gran campaña de sanciones contra Venezuela de los Estados Unidos y de la Unión Europea también y de Panamá. Es un ataque contra las personas en Venezuela en total, no solo a los 52. Y también Canadá es el líder de un grupo de Lima. En Venezuela se llama este grupo el Cartel de Lima, porque en realidad es un grupo de los gobiernos que están aliados con los Estados Unidos y las fuerzas imperialistas en Latinoamérica, y ellos son una parte de este grupo de Lima a atacar Venezuela en una fuerza más unidas, porque es difícil para los Estados Unidos embarcar en Venezuela, pero Canadá tiene un cara diferente, un cara más pacífico se llama, y es más posible para el gobierno de Canadá atacar Venezuela como más suave que los Estados Unidos en estas horas.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No.
No? Okay. So just moving on, in your opinion, what could Trudeau do to improve relations between Canada and Venezuela? Do you think there's a way that we can come back from that?
I think immediately Canada needs to end its sanctions against Venezuela. The Fire This Time Venezuela campaign worked with groups across Canada. There was a petition which received over 500 signatures online directed at Prime Minister Trudeau, calling him to end the sanctions immediately. That petition will be presented in front of Parliament in Canada, and so we need people to call their parliamentarians and tell them to support this motion to end the sanctions immediately. We also need to work to call for Canada to normalize diplomatic relations with Venezuela, and for Canada to really become a voice around the world that says no to intervention in Latin America, that we need to take all of that money that's being put towards these foreign interventions in Latin America, that's been funneled from U.S. and Canadian organizations to political parties in Venezuela, to so-called human rights groups. We need to take all that money and use it here. If Canada really cares about human rights, they'll bring clean water to Indigenous reserves in Canada. They'll take care of women and children and stop pretending that they can somehow be the authority around the world for peace and goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
Alison, en su opinión, ¿qué podría hacer el primer ministro Trudeau para mejorar las relaciones entre Canadá y Venezuela?
A quitar las sanciones inmediatamente. Es posible y es fácil por el gobierno a quitar las sanciones, y hay una petición por internet directo por el primer ministro Trudeau a quitar estas sanciones, y se reciben más de 500 firmas, y va a presentarla en frente al Parlamento de Canadá, y necesitamos gente a llamar sus representantes en Parlamento a preguntar que ellos pueden apoyar esta petición importante. Y también Canadá necesita normalizar, regular las relaciones diplomáticas con Venezuela inmediatamente, y también Canadá puede ser una voz por paz en Latinoamérica y quitar todos sus involucrantes en Latinoamérica inmediatamente, todas de sus intervenciones, y usa toda la moneda de los proyectos imperialistas para los derechos humanos aquí en Canadá. Por ejemplo, a tener agua limpia por los gentes indígenas aquí, o usarlas por escuelas o salud en Canadá. Es más importante que tener intervenciones en Venezuela y Latinoamérica.
Mm-hmm. So what, and you talked about on the government level, but what can Canadian society, what can we people do to support Venezuela and bring about a qualitative change in the bilateral relations between our two countries?
I think it's important that we work to break the media blockade. Really, the voices of poor and working people in Venezuela aren't being heard on international media. And so whatever we can do to help spread their voices, we should be doing. I also invite people to get involved in our campaign against U.S. and Canada sanctions and threats against Venezuela. We have monthly protests at the U.S. consulate, and people can easily come down and join us and help us get more signatures on a petition demanding an end to Canada's sanctions on Venezuela. More information about the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign of Fire This Time can be found on our website, which is www.firethisTime.net. www.firethisTime.net, and there you can find out other ways to get involved. There's organizations working across Canada, and a lot of Latin American solidarity groups also understand the importance of Venezuela at this time. Really, we just ask people to call on the fact that it's the government of Canada that is doing this, and that's where our energy should be directed. It should be directed against the government of Canada, and that's the change that we can force. So let's organize in the streets, come and join our monthly protests, and let's also work in order to make people understand more about what's happening beyond what you hear on CBC.
Right. Outside of your monthly picket actions, is there any other upcoming actions you wanted to share with our listeners?
That would be the one.
Yeah,
so August 10th in front of the U.S. consulate from 4 to 5 p.m. we have a protest action and picket, and then we move in front of the art gallery at 5:30 p.m. So August 10th, it's a Friday at 5:30, where we hand out information and talk to people about Venezuela, and that's where we have the most common discussions. What's actually happening? Isn't there a dictator? Isn't he a tyrant?
Right.
Isn't Canada fighting for human rights? So those are the really important points that we bring up and learn how to counter. Talk about how Venezuela can actually be an example for Canada when it comes to Indigenous relations, for example. So again, Fire This Time Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, www.firethisTime.net.
Alison, ¿qué puede hacer los canadienses, la sociedad canadiense, para apoyar a Venezuela y lograr un cambio cualitativo en las relaciones bilaterales?
Es importante para las personas en Canadá mostrar nuestras opiniones sobre las sanciones y amenazas contra Venezuela. Es posible estar esto en las protestas que están organizando por el Fire This Time Venezuela Campaign cada mes en frente al consulado de los Estados Unidos. La próxima es el 10 de agosto a las 4 p.m. entre 5 p.m. y después en frente a la Galería del Arte a las 5 y media p.m. Este es el 10 de agosto y puede encontrar más información en el sitio de web www.firethisTime.net www.firethisTime.net y puede participar en estas acciones en apoyo de Venezuela y contra las sanciones y amenazas del gobierno de Canadá, y podemos también hablar con sus representantes del Parlamento sobre las sanciones contra Venezuela, y también es importante trabajar juntos a romper el bloqueo mediático contra Venezuela que estás constantemente hablaron sobre los mentiras sobre la situación real por tierra en Venezuela. Es importante combatir estos juntos. Canadá se tiene personas que creen en paz, se creen en un mundo mejor, y pensamos que Venezuela es importante para nosotros a exigir terminar las sanciones y las amenazas inmediatamente, y pueden encontrar, como lo dijo, más información por firethisTime.net, y vamos a ver en las calles.
Sí, y cuanto a la manifestación, la demostración del día 10 de agosto, el 10 de agosto, ¿podrías hablar para nuestros oyentes dónde será la ubicación y la hora?
Bueno, la próxima manifestación de the Fire This Time Venezuela campaign está en frente al consulado de los Estados Unidos en downtown Vancouver, es cerca a Pender y Thurlow, a las 4 p.m. Y después hay una mesa de información y un tiempo a hablar con personas en downtown, en frente a la Galería del Arte, a las 5:30 p.m. el 10 de agosto.
So, Alison, we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask you about your book and for you to tell us, our listeners, about it.
Where we can get the book and, yeah.
Awesome. I'll also just say briefly that the Fire This Time Venezuela campaign also works with a group called the Frente Hugo Chavez in Vancouver, and you can find out how to get involved with them as well. That exists and also has events about Venezuela. So, my book, Revolution and Counterrevolution in Venezuela, published by Battle of Ideas Press, has come out this summer. It's a collection of articles that explores 20 years of U.S. intervention in Venezuela, as well as includes some additional documents, some speeches from Chavez and Maduro, maps and that sort of thing. And I think it's really an important tool to understand how this campaign against Venezuela came about, why it exists, why it's important to get involved in fighting against sanctions and threats and intervention, and really how Venezuela fits in the total picture of U.S. and imperialist intervention in Latin America. And as peace-loving people in Canada, it's actually our responsibility to fight against these interventions and to help the people of Latin America pave their way forward for independence and sovereignty and self-determination. And so you can order the book. It's only $10 because we wanted it to be accessible to people. It's battleofideaspress.com, battleofideaspress.com, and that is the best way to get a hold of us and to order the book. And I encourage people to hear about it and to use it as a tool to learn about Venezuela.
Alison, ¿puedes hablar un poco sobre tu libro y dónde se puede comprarlo?
Mi nuevo libro está de Battle of Ideas Press, la prensa Batalla de las Ideas, aquí en Vancouver, y se imprimiendo esto este verano, es nuevo completamente. ¿Pueden pedir esto?
Pedir o comprar.
Gracias. Por sitio de web www.battleofideaspress.com. Se cuestan solo $10 porque queremos esto es accesible para todas las personas aquí en Vancouver a aprender sobre Venezuela y su historia y las historias de los Estados Unidos y Canadá para intervenir en Venezuela y en Latinoamérica. Es 20 años de historia con ataques de totalmente diferentes formas, mediática, sanciones, amenazas, golpes de Estado también, y es importante conocer estos porque Venezuela en este momento es muy importante por la gente oprimida del mundo, porque es un ejemplo de independencias y soberanía, y por la gente aquí en Canadá se creen en paz y en un mundo mejor. Pienso es importante a conocer y a saber Venezuela y su gente y su revolución bolivariana. Otra vez pueden comprar este libro por www.battleofideaspress.com.
Well, Alison, thank you so much for your time. We're out of time, unfortunately, but I would love to continue that conversation. It's great. Thank you so much for your information and your clarity with your answers as well. I really appreciate your time today.
Muchas gracias, Alison, por su tiempo y por toda la información. Y buena suerte con su nuevo libro.
Yeah, congratulations. That's really impressive for sure.